Hi everyone, we're just waiting for a few more seconds to let everybody in. Awesome. Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Anu. I'm a part of the customer success team at Snap. Along with me, I have Lee Martinson, who is our very own customer success manager. Welcome to our product walkthrough and Q&A session today. The main agenda of our session is to offer our clients an opportunity to ask us any questions, get a refresher on some of Snap's functionalities, and if you're new to Snap, then hopefully you'll get to learn something amazing today. Today, we'll be diving deep in our brand new expense page. We'll take a look at a few examples and how to input the expenses in Snap and present them to the clients by using the charts. Our session is for about 30 minutes, followed by questions. You're free to stay connected for longer to get your questions answered. Otherwise, you can always reach out to our support or watch our session recording later. So I'll quickly point out on how you can ask us questions during the webinar. You'll notice a questions box, and if you don't, please click on the orange arrow to open up the control panel. Again, thanks for joining us today. I'll quickly move over to Snap now. And so before we begin, I want to point out to our Help Center, which is right at the top. If you click at this Help button, we click on it and go to Help Center, which is the first option. Now, this is where you'll find an exhaustive knowledge base of all functions in Snap. You will also have access to our previous webinars. If I click on What's New, and click on the What's New article, this is where you will be able to see everything new in Snap. We have our most recent release updates just right here. You'll also be able to go under our articles on everything related to base expenses and the video on base expenses and additional expenses. That is super helpful to get started. Also to let you know, we'll be recording this session as well, so you can go back and review it if you find it useful. I just want to make sure I'm audible to everybody. If I can get you to type in a yes in the Q&A so that I'm sure that people can hear me. Okay, well, thank you for that, Trevor and Joshua. I really appreciate it. Now let's dive in and look at our new expense page. So for this, we'll get started with a new plan and then look at the expense right there. So I'm gonna hit new client, and we'll create a plan today for David Ohm. So I'm gonna type in David, his last name. So his date of birth is January 1st, 1967. And he's based out of Ontario, so I'm going to keep it like that. Let's move on to the next one. So we're going to keep the general default settings on our general page for his retirement, projection until age, the inflation at 2.1, and the general rates of returns. And now we come to the expense page right here, which is our brand new part. A quick tip here: when you're trying to input anything in client's page, you can always hover over these little gray question marks to know what input Snap is expecting for you to do. And this is for throughout any of the scenario setup or any inputs that you aren't sure about, even on the planning pages. So now when we start a new plan, you will get the option to enter base expenses right here. If you want to think of base expense, it's the minimum amount of after-tax spending that your client needs, excluding items that are entered on other pages, such as debt payments, insurance premiums, saving contributions, etc. We think of base expenses as those recurring lifestyle expenses that would include items such as grocery, transportation, home maintenances. And you can separate out larger one-time expenses or reoccurring expenses such as vehicle purchase, trips, home renovations, etc., and enter these under additional expenses. Now, the base expense here is entered in real dollars or today's dollars, and Snap will automatically index the amount each year with inflation and display this on the planning pages under nominal dollars columns. And that value will be used for all the calculations. Now, if you've been using Snap for a while, you would notice that we changed our after-tax spending to now base expenses. So in case it makes the understanding a bit more clear for you. we can use it that way. Now, for this client, we want to enter the base expense of 50,000 in real dollars. And as he's still working, he has 50,000 as his annual retirement spending goal. Now, the amount that I'm entering here for base expense will start the year of retirement by default. And we can go back to the planning pages to make any changes. Now, in case your client is already retired, the base expense value will start in the first year of the projections, and it will be indexed over time with our general inflation rate. Now, for David, he did let us know that he'll be going on vacation every 4 years after he retires, and it's obviously not something we want. We want to reflect that separately in Snap. So I'll enter the vacation as an additional expense. So I'm going to click Add Expense. Let's give it a description of vacation. And the amount he told me is 10,000. So let's put that amount. For our inflation, I could keep it to general inflation, which in this plan is 2.1, the default, or I could make it $0 or any other percentage that we prefer. For our from age to age, he mentioned he wants to start the vacation when he retires until age 80, and he wants to do this every 4 years. So under frequency, I'm going to set it for every 4 years. I do have a lot of other choices of my frequency, but for this client, he's very specific on every 4 years is what he wants to travel. Now, for the from age and to age column, if I come back here, you're going to notice when I hover over this cell, it gives us this little gear icon that we can click at. When we click into it, it lets us give us further details on the month, date, and the year. So you could change this to be more specific on when you want this specific vacation expense to start and when do you specifically want it to end. Awesome. Now, just a quick note that we will enter all expenses or any information in SNAP in annual values and not monthly or bi-weekly, except for debts that is entered monthly. So we need to ensure that all the amounts that we are inputting here are correct. We also see this one section of highlight and this specific expense. Now, the option of highlight will make sure to highlight the expense in charts. So these expenses will be displayed individually on the cash outflow chart. And if the expense is not highlighted, it will be referred to as additional expenses category on the cash outflow chart. And I'll show you what it looks like. So in this case, let's just say we're going to highlight this specific additional expense in our cash outflow chart. And the maximum that we can highlight any amount of additional expenses separately are 6 between a client and a spouse. Now, I'll quickly jump in and complete the plan for this client. So his employment income is 100,000. Let's get it to index to general inflation. So if I press backspace, it's going to set to general inflation. I'm going to keep everything the same. For the capital assets, he has non-registered balance of about 550,000. No, and I'm gonna say 50% fixed income and 50% equity and 0% right here to fix it. There's also an RSP under David for 180,000. It's an RSP, and for now, we're just gonna keep everything at 50%, so balanced funds. And then a TFSA of 125,000. Awesome. Now, David doesn't have any real assets or any other debts or insurances, so I don't have to really go all the way down this whole scenario setup input. I'm going to simply jump onto the planning pages. Now, when we're on the planning pages, you will notice the columns here, which is under expenses. So there's the base expense in real and nominal dollars. And then there's the column for additional expenses that has the vacation right there. Now, if you notice, you're going to see the inflation adjusted amount of the vacation values every 4 years reoccurring in SNAP. And then the base expense starts at the retirement age of David right here of 50,000, and then the nominal dollars adjusted to inflation each year until the end of the plan. So You're going to also notice that before the retirement age, what David has is this manual cash flow management. And from where our blue dot starts, we have the automatic cash flow begin. Now, let's look at how this is going to look under charts. So I'm going to go under charts right here. And you're going to notice that we have changed our charts a little bit. They're more detailed. You're going to look at the cash outflow chart for David, and we see the base expense right here. If I uncheck all the other legends and simply focus on base expenses right here, we can also see vacation expense come up, and it's been highlighted, so it has a section of its own, and you can see it coming up every 4 years in the plan. If I was to go back under scenario setup and expenses, I could actually say highlight no and come back to the planning pages to look at the charts for David. Any vacation or any additional expense that we enter is now going to be called additional expense, as many as we want right here. So I'm going to pause here and check in if you have any questions under this plan, Lee.
So yeah, nothing specific. I just had a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so where you just said that you can add as many additional expenses, they'll just sum up the total under that chart header. So if you
Yeah.
had multiple expenses, they would just all go together under that same one. And the other thing I was just thinking about was the little trick about general inflation when you're entering the expense itself. Maybe just to go over that again, where it's kind of tricky because you leave it blank and that defaults to general inflation. But if you start typing a number, so let's say like 0% or 1%, then it will overwrite that. And if you start typing general inflation, it's not going to work. You have to actually just leave it blank. So you just want to delete whatever is in there, leave it blank for the general inflation. And as Anu said, that's going to come from your scenario setup general page. So if you go back to that page, Anu, and just show again where that general inflation rate is set. And so that's the value that it's using. So if you were to change that here, then you're linking that to your expense as how it's being indexed, then it will change your expense indexing as well.
Thanks for that, Lee. Something that I also want to point out, and we'll probably review it in another client example, is let's say you do want to make some changes on any of these values right here. You could either go back to scenario setup and expenses to make it, or use what we call as overrides to make the changes. Now, maybe in this example, we don't want this to be $12,057. Maybe it is a higher amount. After when you have a discussion with your client, you could simply click override. You have the choice to copy down this value, index it at the general inflation percentage, or clear override in case there is already an override. And I click on this blue check mark and run scenario. So that will override the value of what was originally there. And if I click on this cross or clear override, then I'm going to clear it and run scenario to come back to the original input that there was. So we have a few ways to edit the values that's under this column and under the base expense as well. Awesome. So now we'll go in and take a look at Matt and Monica's plan. So I've already created the plan for them in the interest of time. And if I go under the client, let's review how expenses are going to look when we have a client and a spouse plan. So for Matt and Monica Cage, we have already created the values. Again, we're using the same default values for inflation, the general rates of returns and everything. And then we jump into the expense page. Now, you're going to notice that the base expense says see the planning pages. Because we've already created the plan for them, the place we can make the changes to their base expense and the combined amount that we want them to spend is going to be onto the planning pages. So what we'll do here is let's look at what additional expenses they have. So after my discussion with them, they have a joint expense of vacation that I've already input here for 12,000. Because it's a client and a spouse plan, we get the option to choose if it's joint or not. For the vacation expense, it is a joint expense. As we notice, we are setting it at general inflation, and it's happening from their age 70 to 80 every 2 years in the plan. And again, we can always use these gear icons to be more specific of when we are starting this expense and when are we ending it. Now for the vacation expense, we want to highlight it specifically in the charts. And then after that, Matt has an individual expense that he wants to input for a vehicle purchase he's doing, which is not joint, of 25,000. I'm setting it to general inflation, and then it's happening only at his age 65. So we leave the from age to age as the same age. And the frequency, we can ignore it because it's not going to matter anymore. It's just the same year we are doing this specific expense. And in this case, we choose not to highlight it. Now, finally, Monica also has an expense of her own. So we won't input it under this expense page because this is exclusively for what's happening under Matt. We'll toggle to Monica's tab and look at the expense that she wants to do. So she has the plan to gift some money to children. So I've input gift to children of amount 40,000. It is not a joint expense. And for this specific one, we're setting the inflation to 0% because that's the exact amount she wants to give to kids. And it's happening at her age 64 specifically. So again, we ignore the frequency of this and simply say highlight yes, because we want to keep it specific and highlighted in the charts. Awesome. So now let's go on to the planning pages right here to see how all of that looks like on the planning page. We want to go under the combined sheet to begin with, and you'll notice that we have our base expense in real and nominal dollars again. Now, I've already input 60,000 of base expense for Matt and Monica. And if you're wondering what will happen when we do not know the base expense. So in this case, you have a few options. You can either use the previous year expense that we have manually calculated in case of this client. In this case, it could be the last year of if they want to continue the lifestyle they have been living before retirement. So you could use about 101,000 right here by changing the values and copying it down for all the years in real dollars. Or you could even use our recommendations button right here and look at the sustainable spending calculator. And the sustainable spending calculator gives us the maximum sustainable level of spending for the clients from their retirement until the end of their plan. So if you would hit calculate, it will give you a value that you could either consider applying it in the plan or even copying the scenario before applying these changes in the plan. So in this case, they're clearly overfunded, they have a lot of money, so they can consider spending more. But with my discussion with them, they are happy to stay at 60,000. They have all these additional expenses they want to focus on too. Okay, so now
Anu,
if,
sorry,
yeah,
can I just jump in for 1 sec? If you
yeah,
do have a budget that they filled out and they know what their lifestyle expenses are, just make sure to subtract out of that any debt payments or insurance premiums or other expenses that you've already entered into the projections, because that's already covered and that would be on top of this base expense value. And that's why we call it base expenses, so that once their mortgage is paid off, they're going to continue spending those base expenses, but the software won't have to get more money for them to pay their mortgage on top of it because it's done.
yeah.
So that's just to remember. If you do have a budget, just make sure to subtract out any of those additional payments that are already happening in your plan that you've entered on other pages.
Absolutely. We don't want to have it double counted for the client. So thanks for that, Lee. Okay, so now when we are also looking at the combined planning page, we refer to our expenses. So the total expenses here are located just right here, and anything that we look at individually, allocated portions will be displayed on their individual tabs. Now, by default for joint additional expenses, the expense is split 50% for each client and spouse. So in this case, vacation is that expense which is joint, which is split 50% under Matt and Monica. And any modifications that you want to do here can be made on the scenario setup and expense page again, or like we said, we can use overrides. You can also use our scenario setup expenses and some of the advanced options if you do want to have individual base expenses and additional expenses for the client. Now, if we go back to the planning pages, we can look that under Matt. At this point, we have these additional expenses right here. So we can see the vehicle expense that he wanted to do, which is adjusted to inflation, and the half split of the vacation expense that they intend to do. Similarly, under Monica, we will be able to see the additional expense of vacation and the gift to children, which is not inflation adjusted. As you remember, we had 0% inflation and that 40,000 expenses right there. And under the combined sheet, I can make the changes to edit and override any of these values just right here. Awesome. So now we'll see the charts and how the cash outflow really looks like. Now, oh, sorry, my bad. I'll go to the charts. Okay, so under the combined cash outflow, we're going to notice the base expense right here. So if I actually hover over or actually get rid of the other legends and simply keep base expenses, we can see that this is their pre-retirement base expense and then this nominal dollar base expense increasing after retirement. We have vacation that we specifically decided to highlight in our charts, then gift to children, which was a one-time expense under Monica, and then additional expense, which has the vehicle right here. I can also choose to put all these expenses under additional expense to have them in one single category. So let's go under scenario, set up an expense to see how that will look like. So we're going to say no to highlighting to all these expenses that we have between the client and spouse. And if we go back to the planning pages and look at the charts, we will be able to see that all of this falls under one specific category. Awesome. So with that, Lee, do we have any questions that I can address, or I have a few other use cases that we could look into?
Yeah, if you can, yeah, continue on. I have one question. If you don't get to, I'll bring it up after.
Okay, all right, sounds good. So that's of course all the basics of how expense inputs can be used. These are obviously helpful when your client wants to look at some specific amounts to be shown in their plan and to see how the money is being withdrawn out and decumulated from the capital assets. Now, let's take an example under maybe Matt's plan for a second. If he decides to work additional year and he plans to make maybe work the full year and earns another 100,000 in his employment income. And if we have a case where he's not able to contribute to any of his accounts, so I'm going to put overrides under all his capital assets so that we block any of the contribution to go in. You're going to notice that our net cash flow column right here now gets a positive and negative value in SNAP, which if you remember, it would show up as shortfalls and surplus in our charts earlier, but now there's a new way if we could identify any of these values in our charts. So if I go under the charts here, we're going to notice that in the year there was this positive value coming in. Our total inflow was much lower than the actual amount that we had in the plan. So, and actually, sorry, I wanna come to 865. The amount of total inflow is much higher than all the base expenses and all the outflow that we have, but basically shows us that there is more money left in the plan that hasn't yet been allocated anywhere. And on the other hand, when the money is going out to get contributed in the second year, you're going to notice that our inflow dips over all the additional expense that we have and all the expenses that we have in the plan. So if I was to show you just right here, there is this additional 10,000 that did not get allocated anywhere in the plan. And then the money goes back into the projection and back getting contributed into probably or getting utilized for the client's cash flow in that year.
Yeah, so basically we're trying to avoid using the net cash flow and cash balance column. Typically they would be all zeros in your plan, but if they're not, this is one way that you can see it happening in the chart, that you'd see that total inflows line being above or below the total
Yeah,
outflows.
yeah,
And
you
so
might.
just, yeah, to solve it, you would just check if you had overrides in your plan and clear those potentially, or create an additional account to capture any surplus, like a non-registered account or a TFSA that has nothing in it to start with, but it's there for those surplus balances later in the projections.
Absolutely. So you might see some inconsistencies right here, and then you want to come back and check, okay, is there any values in the net cash flow? Now, this is the use case when we do have some surplus lying around that hasn't been contributed. What would happen and how would the charts look like when they actually have a shortfall in the plan? So let's take a look at that use case. I'm gonna undo all of these changes that I just did here. Oops, I'm gonna get rid of these overrides. Okay, so if you go under the combined sheet to change the base expense that our client is spending, they wanted to do 60,000, but now they have a mind change and they feel, okay, they can spend probably 120,000, and we copy down until age 100 and run scenario. So it seems to be working for them, but only until age 80. And the way to figure out that they have a shortfall is because now they have these pink highlights coming up in the plan from age 80 until the end of the plan. And we do see these large shortfall amounts in the net cash flow column that actually tells us how much is the shortfall each year. And the cash balance gives us a cumulative total, almost borrowing from the projection to maintain the lifestyle for the client, leaving them with a really large shortfall of negative 2.7 million at the end. So how does this look like in the charts? So when we go under charts right here, we're going to notice that our values are obviously inconsistent right here. Plus, the total inflow is far below our actual outflows in this case. So if you hover over the total inflow sort of line, dotted line that we see, the base expenses and all the other income tax, whatever are the outflow sources, are way more than the total inflow amount, which explains to us that there isn't enough money in the client plan, or the inflow is not enough to maintain the outflows that there is.
Yeah, and if you just put your mouse over any given year, it will tell you the shortfall, which
Yep.
is what you would see under the net cash flow column as a negative number on the planning page.
Yep. So it's just right there. Thanks for that, Lee. Awesome. So that's another thing you would want to keep in mind, and either you can look at the charts or the pink highlights that really gives us the idea that your client probably needs to you need to probably review the plan or look at what the shortfall values are. And at this point, you can also go under recommendations to suggest some other options by using our calculators right here. Awesome. So with that said, let's go back and go into one last common use case that you might see. I'm going to go back to 60,000 of spending because that seemed to be working for Matt and Monica. So let's do that and go under Monica here. Now, what if Monica has a 40,000 gift to children plan at age 64, but she wants to only withdraw the money from a specific account in this case? You're going to notice that right now, when she needed that additional money, we could see that her usual expenses were bumped up a little bit. There was more withdrawal coming out of the non-registered account because Snap is following the withdrawal strategy of NTR. It will try and withdraw from the non-registered for any expense requirement or any cash outflow that is needed. And then it will go to TFSA and then finally the RSP. But let's say if Monica wants to withdraw this 40,000 from her TFSA only, what we could do is use overrides to withdraw that specific amount of expense that she has in mind. So I can click on the 40,000, I can click on the cell under TFSA and put in negative for a withdrawal and put in 40,000 right here. Do the blue check mark and run scenario. And what that will do is reduce the non-registered withdrawal that was happening, because now this 40,000 has been allocated for the gift to children expense and all the other cash flow is being managed around that. And that way we can be more specific or from where our specific expense is coming out from. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So with that, I guess these are some of the most common use cases that you might see with your client plan. I just want to highlight a few things only as a reminder. If you want to make changes to any expenses, you need to go for a client and spouse. You need to go under the combined sheet. to take a look at the expenses, or if you want to use overrides to tweak any of these values, you could do it right here. Or alternatively, you can always go back under scenario setup and expenses to see and review what you want to do, or if you want to make any changes with it. And of course, like Lee said, for general inflation, we can either put in any value that we want or hit backspace, and that will bring us to the general inflation as defaults. Awesome. So that's all I had, Lee, for today. Do you have any questions that I can cover now?
So there's just, yeah, one more question to kind of go a little bit deeper into what you were just showing about where is the money going to come from for this expense. So
Okay.
basically your additional expenses are on top of your base expenses, and they're just going to be part of the cash flow management. So if you're past the CFM start age, so you're in the portion of the software where you're giving a target spend, the software is going to start withdrawing money from your assets to cover that expense, um, following the default cash flow management order. So maybe the specific question, Anu, was if you were going to give maybe an early inheritance to your children. So we could change that gift to children additional expense to
Mhm.
maybe a joint expense that happens, I don't know, later in the plan, like at age
Okay,
90
so
or something
so
like
let's
that.
let's change that. So if we say gift to children, or yeah, inheritance, maybe it's a larger amount, or I could
Right.
make it
Let's say
to,
$200,000 or
sure,
something like that.
let's do 200,000, and it's happening at our client's age 85. So it's at Monica's age 85, and I'm gonna say yes to the joint column. And now if we go on to the planning pages, let's focus on the combined sheet first to see this expense now. So we're going to notice that we have this large 200,000 big inheritance that we are giving to kids. If you go under Matt and Monica, so I'm under Matt now, he's withdrawing a big 100,000 at age 87. And if you want to see where the money is being withdrawn from, if you scroll to the right-hand side, you would notice that our withdrawal sequence is still NTR. Snap is withdrawing a big amount of money from the non-registered, and at the same time, we do see some money coming out of the RIF. If you hover over that value, it tells us that it is the RIF minimum that has to be withdrawn. So what Snap does is it takes into factor this amount of money, and then whatever is remaining that is required, it pulls it out from the non-registered following the sequence of NTR. If by any chance there wouldn't be any money in the non-registered, then our next possible withdrawal account would be the TFSA. That's where the money is going to come out from. And then if we look at the same thing under Monica to see how it's happening under her situation, we can see this 100,000 right here at her age 85. Um, she has two sources of minimum values that needs to be pulled out. We have a lift under her, so Snap is taking out the minimum lifts as we see in this little gray box right here, and then the minimum rifts are coming out. So after those two are taken care of, Snap pulls out a larger amount of money from the non-registered account to make up for that big lump sum expense that's happening. Okay, Lee, does that answer the question, or do we want to
Yeah,
look at
that's
it more
perfect. I
briefly?
think that answers it. I would just add that if a big expense like that happens before the CFM start age, that's when the software is not going to automatically withdraw any money from the assets. So you'll need to do that manually. So for
Hmm.
example, if you had the vacation happening this year, oh, and that's one thing that we didn't mention was if you leave the start under expenses, let's say the vacation, we'll change it to from age, leave it blank. And what that means is that it's going to start in the first year of the plan. So every 2 years, starting from the first year and going to the final year, because we left those blank, there's going to be a vacation that's jointly split, so 6,000 each. And in the years before the CFM start age, there won't be any additional withdrawals made from the assets to cover that. You would have to do it manually. It's just going to pay for that vacation out of the cash flow that each of them has coming in from their employment income and anything else that they have income wise. So you can see basically that the the after-tax spending is calculated for you. Sorry, I'm so used to saying after-tax spending, but the base expenses is calculated for you, and it's less in those years where there's that vacation
Yep.
expense.
Yeah, so as we can notice, this is lower values than the years where we do not have this vacation expense. And like Lee mentioned, if you want this vacation or this specific expense to be withdrawn out of a specific account for the client, all you need to do is use overrides, put in the manual values right here, and then run your scenario, so that you're going to now notice that our base expense is at 54,000, similar to the year where we don't have this base expense. But in the third year where we did not do the override, the value has now dropped. So you need to probably keep in mind, if you're working in a manual cash flow, then you need to adjust the values of where the money is getting withdrawn out of, or um, otherwise it's going to be just taken off from the client's regular employment and other sources of income that there is. Awesome. Thanks for that, Lee. Great point.
All right. Well, I pushed us over 5 minutes over, but there aren't any other questions right now. But yeah, please check out the articles, try it out yourself, and we'd love to hear what you think. So let us know. Send us an email or give us a call.
Yeah, you can always look at our what's new. We have some really cool videos. They're super short, but they're very descriptive. You can always take a look at them before you get started with your client. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us with our support line or hit contact button and send us an email. We try and respond to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.